All right, so what we're closing out the book of the chapter 2 of the book of Exodus, just to bring us to where we are. Last week we had Moses, and for the first 21 verses of chapter 2, we have the whole Moses and the killing the taskmaster and running away to Midian and helping scare away the nasty shepherds so that the Kohen of Midian, the head, his daughters can water their flocks, and they go running home, and then they come back, and then they get him, and then they bring him back home. And verse 21 ended with, and the Kohen Midian gave his daughter to his, and we're not quite sure what daughter she is, one of seven, but gave his daughter to Moses as a wife, and that's where it left off. And the next thing we know, Vateled ben, Vayikra et Shemo Gershom, Ki Amar Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nochriah. And so the next thing we know, Vateled ben, and she gives birth to a son.
That's quick.
Yeah. I mean, they
It
didn't
was
even
very
lie
quick.
down together. He just took her as a wife.
Yeah. Don't shake hands.
You want me to explain that to you, Sam, or I don't think that.
Well, there's something about, women can have birth without intercourse. I read that somewhere around this time of the year.
Yes.
Tomorrow.
Yes.
Tomorrow's the day.
They discussed that at the Council of Rabbits, right?
Yeah.
I love this group.
So he has a son, and Vateled ben, and she gives birth to a son, and then Vayikra et Shemo, and he called his name. So sometimes in the Torah we have Vatikra, and she called his name, and sometimes we have Vayikra, he called his name. So she gives birth, and he names him. He names the son, and he Vayikra et Shemo, literally, and he called his name. So he named him. He called his name Gershom, which breaks into two parts. Ger, which is a foreigner or a one who is a resident alien. So someone who's not of the group but is with the group, is an immigrant or not yet an immigrant. And Sham is there. So literally, Ger Sham, a stranger there.
Don't tell Ice.
However, when we then get why he gave the name Gershom, I was a stranger there, we never get the there in the next part of this verse, the explaining. So Kiamar, for he said, Ger Haiti, I was a stranger. And if we really wanted to do the etymology name, we would say Ger Haiti Sham. I was a stranger there. But he doesn't say I was a stranger there. He says Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nochriah. I was a stranger, or I was a resident alien, whatever it might be, and in a land of Nochriah, a land of foreigners. So this is a different kind of foreigner. This is foreigners who are not living with me, who are not my kinsmen in any way, not my neighbors. So I was a stranger in the land of Nochriah, in the land of strangers or foreigners. The question within the name is which land is the Eretz Nochriah, which land is the land of strangers that he was a stranger in, or a foreigner. He was a stranger in a foreigner in the strange land. Is he referring to I was a stranger be'eretz nochriah in the land of Egypt, or I was a stranger in the land of Midian? Because in both cases, he is the ger, or was the ger, and in both cases, they are nochriah, they are foreigners to him, no sense of connection.
I think Robert Heinlein knew him. Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah, but that was not just a strange land, that was a strange planet.
Yes.
And in fact, that's where Heinlein got the title from, was this particular verse.
I just wondered that. Wow.
Can you
I
say
think
more?
often they're just not coincidences in
Right. Well,
good
again,
writers like that.
Stranger in
Just
a Strange
because
Land
the
is
genre
about,
is different.
yeah, Stranger in a Strange Land is about a messianic figure who saves people
Uh,
or saves the planet from a foreign power.
Yep.
If you
I love
haven't read it,
Heinlein.
Michael Valentine Smith is born on Mars, but he's an Earthling, and he's brought back to Earth, and he brings a whole new religion, a whole new world concept to the Earthlings, and he helps them against the foreign power, the Martians. I One of the books that I highly recommend to people to read for many different levels.
is say it. Say that.
And Heinlein, of course, being Jewish, draws a lot from Torah and Jewish tradition, including the one of the main characters, Jubal Harshaw. And Jubal is, of course, one of the children of the last generation after Adam before we get Noah.
Yep.
Say the book though. That I was right.
The book is called Stranger in a Strange Land
Stranger in a Strange Land.
by Robert Heinlein. So yes, Moses is recognizing, and perhaps, as will be later commentary, those who are of the faith of Moses. And in fact, the ring vow that a couple says to each other at their wedding in a Jewish ceremony is that you are consecrated Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, according to the tradition of Moses and Israel.
Mm.
So the Mosaic people or the Mosaic covenant or the Mosaic text, which is Exodus through Deuteronomy, is those who are of the Mosaic world, the Moses people, the faith of Moses, are perennial ger sham, perennial strangers there. And indeed, after the destruction of the Second Temple, for 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years, Jews were strangers in any land in which they live. So the commentaries actually say that the reason why it says Ger Haiti be'eretz nochriah without identifying the eretz nochriah is because this is a recognition in the Torah text, according to the commentaries, that we would always be wherever we live, we would be in an eretz nochriah, in a land of strangers or a land of foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
So he names his son that. And Vayehi bayamim harabim hahem vayamot melech Mitzrayim, not the end of the verse, but the end of the story. And remember, the Torah does not give us chapters and verses or punctuation. So in the Torah, it could have been, in fact, recognized as the end of the story. However, in the later division of the Bible into chapters and verses, the second half of 23 was combined with the first half of 23 into one full verse. But if we had written a chapter verse division of the Torah in post form critical world, we might have in fact ended the verse on 23 and started a new verse, or perhaps even a new chapter with the next half. So vayamim vayehi vayamin harabim hahem, literally, and it was bayamim harabim hahem. Bayamim harabim is in the many days, and hahem those. So in those many days, without, again, any real sense of what those many days are, other than clearly Moses has run away from Egypt. Moses has found shelter in Midian. Moses has found a home with the Kohen Midian, the head of Midian, the priest of Midian. Moses has created a home with the daughter of the priest of Midian, and Moses has had a son, which does in fact take a few days or many days. So somewhere in the midst of those many days, which is at least 9 months worth of many days, and possibly more. So in the midst, sometime during those many days that Moses is hiding out, the king dies. Vayamot Melech Mitzrayim, and died the king of Egypt. So one could think that in fact this is going to be the cue to Moses that he can go back home. But he's not going back home. But a king dies. End of story until chapter 3, which is next week. And you'll see next week, chapter 3 does pick up the story with verse 2. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, in our other story, in our Northern Kingdom story, which does not give us a lot of Egyptian detail, because that's not important to the Northern Kingdom, to the Ephraimite, to the coastal, to whoever we're dealing with at this point. They're more concerned with how did we get to be here with our Mosaic priests in the Northern Kingdom. And we're going to start to get here the need for a liberation from slavery, bondage, persecution, whatever it was that was going on. We left off with the Egyptian leadership trying to eliminate the Israelite community. That's where our blue story left off. You have to go all the way back to chapter 1 to find that. They were in that story. And now we pick the story up with Vaye'anchu v'nei Yisrael min ha'avodah vayizak'u v'tahal shavatam el ha'elohim min ha'avodah. So we don't have any taskmasters. We just have oppression. Vaye'anchu v'nei Yisrael, and the Vaye'anchu, the Anach, is a lamenting. It's an act of, we're really upset. We are in dire straits. So Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the Israelites, are now lamenting min ha'avodah, from their work. And once again, remember that in Torah, in biblical Hebrew, there's no differentiation between words that we say translate as slavery and we translate as work or service. So avodah is work, service. And the
Can you go back a little? The link doesn't
ye'anchu,
seem to be strong, at least not for me.
the vaye'anchu,
Yeah,
they're lamenting.
yep.
They're being burdened, but we don't really get a sense of the level of burdening.
Mm.
We just know that they served Pharaoh, they built some cities, they multiplied, and Pharaoh came in and tried to get rid of them, or at least tried to get rid of all the males. And so
What's the
what is
subject of he lamented?
Bnei Israel? The children of Israel lamented. The Israelites are lamenting min ha'avodah, from their service, from their work. Unclear as to whether it was indentured servitude, captured servitude, slavery servitude, voluntary servitude that was more than they bargained for, but they're in servitude of some form, and they don't like it. And there's a sense that the Vayeyanchu, that they're lamenting the fact that they allowed themselves to be pressed into service, as opposed to the red story, the Y story, the story that we had, where they're really burdened with work. So we don't know what they're actually lamenting, but whatever it is, Vayizaku, they cried out. Za'ak is a cry, a crying out. Vayizaku, and they cried out. So the subject of all these verbs is the Bnei Yisrael, the Israelites. And they are Vata'al Shavatam El HaElohim. So Vata'al is and went up. Aliyah, Oleh. But here the subject is not the children of Israel, it's the crying out. Shava, Shava'ah, Shava'ah, this word at the end of the blue line is a crying out.
Mm.
It's the plea. And Shava'atam, the am ending tells you it's their plural plea, but Shava'ah is a feminine noun, so it's Vata'al, the plea that they sent out went up.
Mm.
So their plea went up to Elohim, went up to, and again, we don't know in the original story of this, does their plea go up to God or does their plea go up to the gods?
Huh.
Remember, Elohim is the generic word, and El is the generic word for a god. Elohim is a bunch of gods. Unless you then get into the later understanding of the Torah text, in which Elohim is Yud He Vav He, is our God, Eloheinu. But even the Eloheinu, our God, would say that our God as opposed to somebody else's God. So are they crying out to the God of their ancestors, or are they crying out to the pantheon of Egypt? And again, the text does not make that clear from its origin source, but becomes clear when we combine the stories together and make it seem like they were monotheists from even before, from Abraham. So we have to be careful in translating El HaElohim from how it might have been understood by the biblical author as opposed to how we understand it now in Torah. But they're crying out min ha'avodah, from the service, from the work, from whatever it is that they're doing. And the beginning of this particular section, Vaye'anchu, is they're regretting. They're regretting the service. And if we go all the way back to the end of Genesis, remember Joseph set it all up, that everybody under the sway of the Pharaoh would be a servant to Pharaoh. Remember, Joseph created, according to Genesis, Joseph created the serf system in Egypt. And he created it as a way of guarding against future famines, so that the Pharaoh would always be storing up food for the population by taking away from them some of the food that they would have wasted or spoiled or overeaten if they were left on their own. That's that whole Genesis story. And Joseph left his brothers down there to be part of the Egyptian system. So that's where Exodus chapter 2 is taking us. Verse 24, Vayishma Elohim et na'akatam, Vayizkor Elohim et brito, et Avraham, et Yitzchak, the et Yaakov. By the way, notice always when we have Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the Torah always does it as Avraham, Yitzchak, the Yaakov. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And since there's no punctuation, in other cases, when we have lists of things, it's at this, the at this, the at this, and this, and this, and this. So Torah generally uses vav, the and, as a comma. But when it comes to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it's always Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So we have some issues of, again, we don't know what was the original story and who were the original ancestors. Was there two ancestor stories, an Avraham ancestor story and a Yitzchak ancestor story that were combined into a generational ancestor story? Some of the evidence of that is the pretty much everything Yitzchak does in Genesis on his own is an exact duplicate of what Avraham already did. So we had wife-sister stories of our ancestors. We have one for Avraham with Elimelech, Avimelech, and then one with Yitzchak with the same guy. We have wells by Avraham. We have the same wells by Yitzchak. So just a little note that it's always Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But back to the beginning of verse 24. Vayishma Elohim et na'akatam. So Vayishma and heard Elohim, now without the definite article. So again, is this our God heard or a God heard? So they cry out to the gods, and a God took notice of their cry, which obviously is a very different root origin story than the way in which the Torah has developed it. The answer, of course, is we don't know how they did it, what they meant, because we don't have the footnotes and all of the appendices. And we don't have the biblical commentaries of the biblical author. So, Vayishma Elohim et na'akatam, and a God, or God, heard their groaning. Na'aka is groaning, as opposed to shava'ah, which is pleading. So they're pleading, and they're groaning, and they're moaning, and they're crying out, which may just be a presaging of how they're going to treat Moses afterwards, where for 40 years all they do is fetch and groan and moan. So was the work really that terrible? Or are they just a bunch of groaners and moaners? In any case, God or a God hears it. Vayizkor Elohim et brito, and God or the God that listened, because heard and listen in Hebrew are the same. Vayishma, and listened or and heard. So God listened, and God remembered that covenant, the covenant of Avraham, of covenant of Yitzchak, and the covenant of Yaakov. So they cry out, they moan, they groan, their cries go up, their pleading goes up. God pays attention to it, hears it, listens to it, and then God says, oh yeah, I remember I made a covenant with their ancestors. So the God forgot. The God got too busy to think about it. The God waited for them, the people, to put in notice of a reminder of the covenant. Not quite sure where to go on verse 24, therefore, but commentary lets us go wherever we want with it. Verse 25, Vayar Elohim et bnei Yisrael, Vayeda Elohim. Vayar is and saw, Elohim. So again, Elohim saw, a God saw, or the God saw, or God capital G saw, or looked at. So listening and looking at, or hearing and seeing, however you want to translate those words. We have two senses going on. We have a hearing and we have a seeing sense. And looks at or sees the Bnei Israel, the Israelites. Vayeda Elohim. Vayeda is from the verb knowing, but it's a different form of the verb, so it became known to or took note of, as I translate it. So God somehow remembered and knew, or took note of, or was reminded, or came into conscious awareness. End of the chapter. Next week, you'll be practicing reading and we'll look at switch scenes back to Moses. So chapter 2 was Moses in the red, but was Egypt with the Israelites in the blue. Chapter 3 is going to go, therefore, back to now, and meanwhile, back with Moses. So, and we have again next week, we have this blended story, and notice how the two separate stories were woven by the editor into one continuous story that is not a continuous story. So again, next week when you're reading, if you read
What
one,
roughly,
what was that?
roughly when were the verses dictated, chosen?
So we don't know the hundreds of years of oral tradition before it's written down. We don't know how old the stories are. I would say, would believe that certainly the root mythologies of Genesis are very, very old, probably even second millennium before the Common Era, whereas the writing down of them is mid-first millennium of the Common Era, and the creating of the stories is probably late second or early first millennium of the Common Era, so that these stories of Exodus are Levitical stories. They're stories of the Northern Kingdom Levitical system and the Southern Kingdom Kohen Levite system, which would put them in the pre-First Temple time, whereas the writing down and the combining of them into one joined story is Second Temple time. So yes, there's hundreds of years in between going on of oral to written and then written to combined written.
Rabbi Sam, can I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. I may have missed this, but from what you said, there's unclarity between at some point, whether there was a monolithic God or more than one God, right?
Well, all the way through the Torah, there are always more than one God. Actually, all the way through most of Tanakh, because you would not have had prophets of Yud-He Vav-He taking a proof system against prophets of Baal. So the Tanakh recognizes throughout the Tanakh that there are gods that other people worship. whether or not the biblical author recognizes the validity of those gods that they worship,
Uh-huh. But
or
it was a
has
Jewish God that was one God, right?
right. For there is the Israelite God, there's the biblical God.
Right.
Is the biblical God the only God, monotheism, or is the biblical God the highest God or the best God or the our God?
Is that for Jews or for Jews and other people?
Well, I mean, the biblical world is a what we would call Jews, Israelite, an Israelite community or world view that recognizes that it's part of a larger worldview.
Uh, uh-huh.
So we do not have other gods, and we get throughout the prophets, when you try to bring those other gods into your home and become syncretistic, that's when we have problems, and the prophets come along and try to get rid of those other gods that got brought in. But certainly in the Torah, there clearly are other gods.
Mm.
Or in our modern language, we might say other gods that people worshiped. And at one point, again in prophetic works, you all worshiped what they call no gods. And that would
Uh-huh.
be, in a sense, the idea these are gods who have no God power.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But what does the original story, what does this blue story that we're tracing and talking Elohim, what is it? Is it our God against your God? Is it our God is the God? What the later biblical authors and indeed biblical commentaries will do is create that sense of our God and your God is a no God.
Yeah.
But we don't know that the original biblical author and audience recognized that distinction.
Our God and the Council of Rabbits.
Right. So is there some, obviously it's speculation, but is there some idea of what led to the integration of the northern and southern versions?
Yes, there actually is very clear and that is the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom.
So when the northern kingdom ceased to exist,
Right. What
so
did the
then,
people do in the northern kingdom? What did the average Jew or even the Jewish leadership or the northern kingdom leadership do after their land is destroyed by the Assyrians? And unlike probably the non-historical 10 lost tribes system, most likely they fled south into the haven of the southern kingdom, which held out against the Assyrians and held out for another 200 and more years until the Babylonians finally come in and get rid of them. And what did they bring with them? They brought their traditions, their stories, their Torah.
so it must have been quite a meeting when they said, "Well, that's not the way I remember it."
Exactly. So
But then,
they're
but then you're saying there was some, at least they got together and agreed on how to put it down.
well, we're not, yes, at some point. So again, we have no great evidence for the northern and southern kingdom in the same way that we really have no great evidence for what the first temple actually was or looked like. We have the tradition that the second temple was built on the site of and with the plans of the first temple. But modern criticism would say that the second temple, when it was built, claimed to be simply a rebuilding of the first temple in order to justify its historicity going all the way back to Moses, and that the first temple was built on the plans of the tabernacle in the wandering in the wilderness that probably never happened. So, yes, they most likely they would have taken their tradition and lived side by side with variant traditions in the whatever was the first temple, remembering that in those days of the years in the neighborhood of the 8th century before the Common Era, the idea of empires really in the modern sense doesn't exist. There are some scholars who say that the first empire was actually Alexander,
Mhm.
that it was more that the Assyrian, Babylonian, others were more localized and conglomerate, perhaps political or economic sway and control rather than an actual unified empire. So even the Southern Kingdom wasn't really a united peoples in the Southern Kingdom, or was it a sort of a loose confederation of tribes and peoples with a shared common ancestry of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, with varying stories? And therefore, the thought is that those two stories pretty much live side by side, with people holding on to whichever story was theirs and living in a loose confederation of neighborhoods. By the way, that still goes on today. Having lived 14 years in Arizona, in the northeast corner of Arizona is a town that is made up of both Hopi and Navajo people living side by side with each other.
Oh,
One of those tribes observes daylight savings time, the
oh,
other one doesn't.
Hmm. What's
So
that town?
therefore, they live side by side with different clocks
oh.
half the year.
What town is that?
I don't know the name of the town. It's
Okay.
more of a village. It's a
Okay.
Hopi Navajo village in up in Four Corners.
So Sam, if you could, what is your conclusion of all this material? I mean, you've processed it and thought about it. It's relatively new to me. I have a very I mean, I've done some reading, but this is very heavy, profound stuff, really. Uh, I love that you're teaching it. Have you thought through what your conclusion is? I mean,
Well, so yeah, and the idea is we have now a Torah with tradition that has bound us together for at least 2,000 years.
right.
But it's bound us together because we learned to get along with each other without agreeing about our story.
We as a Jewish people.
We as a Jewish people have various stories that do have a common element, a common root, that were able at some time to be combined into one story. And that's getting back to Steve's question. So we have these two stories, in a sense, in the First Temple period, living side by side. The whole southern kingdom then gets destroyed in some way by Babylonia, gets carried away. Many people stayed, probably with their shared separate stories with a common root of some sort, or at least a common God, or an agreed upon common God without trying to define the God. And then the Persians bring us back. We have the Second Temple. And sometime during the Second Temple period, we have someone who we are claiming was Ezra or his school, who at some point need to take our various stories and make one common story so that we can have one common country,
Mhm.
a united country under the leadership of this Second Temple. And that's when they take these two separate stories of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers and combine them into one common story and tie them all together by giving us a fifth book called Deuteronomy.
So that's what, okay.
And Deuteronomy shows that they're really one story.
Uh-huh.
And by masterfully weaving the two stories together, as we will see next week, we take these two separate stories that people agreed to. You have your story, I have my story. Let's just move on. Let's trade with each other. Let's support each other. Let's keep going. And ultimately, we need to not be separate colonies. We need to be one united nation, one united states.
All right. I mean, it was a noble pursuit, but to some extent, Deuteronomy then they were rewriting history to serve their purposes.
Of course,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Not that we would ever do that now, but But what's also interesting, though, when you talk about these two stories and the fact until they put it down as one, they were living with two stories, let's assume comfortably. It didn't preclude them from 1,000 years later declaring that people were heretics. It'd be a different story.
Yes. Yeah, once you create, and we don't know within those stories whether people who didn't like their stories, either story, were declared as heretics.
The third story.
Yes, but we knew and again, you have to go beyond Torah into Judges and into Joshua and Judges before you get into Samuel and Kings, that they lived as separate tribes for hundreds of years. And in fact, there was intertribal rivalry and warfare. So there were times that the tribes were fighting each other. So unfortunately, they didn't live all that amicably all the time with each other.
Mhm.
But once they're
Well, they need to keep in practice.
yes, once their large group of separate tribes in the Northern Kingdom living side by side with various détentes and ceasefires and whatever else going on, once they're all subsumed under the tribal name of Judah, because the Southern Kingdom was a tribe, the Northern Kingdom was a conglomerate of tribes. So the conglomerate of tribes, when they move into Judah, now probably, again, here we have to use imagination because we have no historical anchor to hold on to through archaeology or anything else, and no textual material other than what has been maintained. The 10 tribes probably said, everybody, we really should unite our story into one so we have a stronger base against the tonal tribe that we've moved into, and convince them that we like them and they like us, and we'll let them have their story as long as they let us have our story.
So would you say, Sam, that the divisiveness that can exist within Judaism is rooted or has some play? I mean, this has some play in that, or was it a historical evolution that happened to every group of people?
Well, so I will yield to the psychiatrist on human nature,
Yeah.
but I would say that the Torah as we have it is a recognition of human nature that, given our own proclivities, we will not necessarily get along with people we don't agree with.
Uh-huh.
And by creating Torah, we have a way of saying somehow we have to learn how to get along with those we don't agree with, even though it doesn't always work. And
Or last.
right, or yeah, and the Tanakh is a whole. We got Genesis through Deuteronomy. We got this great united document. Let's all live in peace. And we have the rest of Tanakh is we didn't do it. We keep backsliding. We
Uh-huh.
keep falling back into human nature. And so one of the ways to read Torah, I would say, for example, where we are in our Parashah system, because we've now had Jacob become Israel. Israel is the attempt to become our higher selves. Jacob is our falling back into human nature. And the wrestling story says, you will no longer be known as Jacob, you will now be Israel. And for the rest of Genesis, for the rest of the Torah, he goes back and forth between Jacob and Israel.
So Jacob is the one that struggles.
Israel is the one who tries to become his higher self. Jacob is the base human nature. And if you want to know another version of base human nature, I do recommend a book that also is biblically based about the one of the foreign gods whose name was Baal Zevuv. Baal Zevuv becomes in later writing Beelzebub,
Yeah.
but Baal Zevuv literally means the Lord of the Flies.
Yep.
Oh, is that what that is?
That's where that book came
Yep.
from.
Yep.
That's where the title came from anyway.
Hmm.
And yeah, Lord of the Flies is not a great commentary on human nature.
No, it's not.
I would just say it sort of explains something to me about why many of us are so upset that there's so much disagreement. I don't hear often in other religions that they're like totally freaked out that some other church disagrees with them.
Ask Catherine about that.
I feel like we're obsessed with it. We've become
No.
obsessed with why.
Interdenominational Christianity is not a happy place,
Okay,
No.
yeah, that is true.
nor is, for that matter, interdenominational Islam.
uh, uh, good to know.
And by the way, another story about human nature is Animal Farm.
Yeah. Yep. All good books.
Interesting books, challenging anyway. Yeah.
So yeah, Torah tries to create a utopian model in a dystopian world.
Say that again. Torah. Okay.
Torah is trying to create a utopian model in a dystopian world.
Mhm.
Rabbi Sam, have you read Kaddish.com?
Yes. All right, so just closing out today, we have more to look at next week. But I think the Torah is a blueprint that uses the past to try to a guide to the future. And we have to look at the different wing stories, blueprints that led to the final blueprint, which was not a final blueprint. By the way, in the traditional world of Judaism, there is traditional Orthodox commentary that the temple was destroyed because we didn't get along with each other.
That we get punished if we don't.
Yeah, so there is that model of even as we are fighting with each other, we cause our own destruction.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So
because
that's
they
where
didn't
we
have
are.
the 4-to-1 ratio.